to ask you to spend the next few minutes thinking about truck drivers. That's probably not a group of people you spend a lot of time thinking about in your day-to-day life, but I think you should. And the reason is because truckers do largely invisible work. We're totally dependent on the work they do, and we hardly ever think about it. And truckers actually have some really surprising things to teach us about surveillance and monitoring. So there are about 3.5 million truck drivers in the US. They're hidden human infrastructure. Right? We hardly ever appreciate the work they're doing, but truckers have a saying, which is, if you got it, a truck brought it. And if you think about it, even in the digital age, basically every material thing you own was at some point on a truck being driven by a truck driver. They really literally touch our lives in lots of different ways. And when I talk to truck drivers about and I should say too, when we do think about truck drivers, it's largely not in a positive sense, right? Sometimes we think about them when we're trying to pass them on the highway, and that's not usually a very positive experience. And then pop culture tends to portray the driver as a misfit or an outlaw, not someone who's doing a difficult job working really hard. Now, I've spent a lot of the last couple of years talking to drivers about their work, and when I ask them what attracted them to truck driving, a lot of what they tell me is kind of this romance of the open road, or the idea of autonomy, the idea that no one is looking over your shoulder, no one is monitoring you, right? You do the work in the way that you see fit. Now, as we all know, the open road isn't actually all that open when you really look at it. There are lots of rules on the road, and truckers deal with rules in spades, much more so than most of us do. And the rule I want to talk with you about today has to do with the hours that truckers drive. Now, the federal government restricts the hours truckers can drive, which is a safety regulation, right? The idea is the more drivers are on the road, the more tired they're going to be. The more tired they are, the more likely they are to cause expensive and deadly accidents. So the government caps the number of hours they can drive every day. Now, for about the past 80 years, truckers have been required to keep track of their hours using paper logbooks, which look like this. You can buy a book of these logs at any truck stop for just a few dollars, and it's a pretty simple technology. The driver just takes a pencil, draws a line on this graph, indicating when he's driving, when he's off duty, when he's doing something like fueling or unloading. And then he has to be ready to present this piece of paper to law enforcement if he's pulled over or at a weigh station. Now, the problem with this system is that drivers don't take these seriously at all. They often call their logs their comic books or their coloring books or their swindle sheets, and it's well known that drivers pretty rampantly fudge their logs, right? And that makes sense. There are a lot of contingencies on the road. Sometimes trips just take longer than you think they're going to. And drivers are financially incentivized to stay on the road as much as possible. So they have another saying. Drivers have a lot of sayings. And this one is, if the wheel ain't turning, you ain't earning, right? They're not getting paid to sit by the side of the road waiting for the next available legal driving time. So if you think that this is a problem, if you really think we should be getting tired truckers off the road, one potential solution is to monitor drivers electronically, and that's the approach that the Department of Transportation is taking. So they're in the process of rolling out a mandate that will require all drivers to buy, install, and use what are called electronic onboard recorders, or EOBRs, which look like this. And basically, the EOBR just automates the function of the paper log. It plugs into the truck itself, and it monitors when the truck is in motion to construct the same kind of log, right? Now, as you can imagine, not every trucker is a huge fan of the EOBR. Some of them are, actually. Some of the drivers I've talked to have said, this kind of levels the playing field a bit, keeps me from having to compete with someone who's willing to break all the rules all the time. But by and large, most drivers feel that these are, black boxes or spy boxes is a common descriptor for them, that they're invading their privacy, that they're impugning their dignity, and that the boxes treat them like children or criminals. So as you can imagine, there's quite a bit of controversy in the industry right now about these. Now, one of the reasons for this has to do with the capabilities of the box itself. So what the government is likely to require is basically just a piece of, just a box that monitors when the truck is in motion, where it is, not actually all that much data. But what's key here is the auxiliary features that are bundled with that technology, right? And it's those auxiliary features that truckers' employers are very interested in, because they're also very interested in monitoring their employees, right? So in a way, it's as if the government said, okay, everybody has to buy a cell phone that makes calls, right? But you guys all know you can't really just buy a cell phone that makes calls. Basically, all the cell phones on the market make calls and then some. And so what is the and then some for EOBRs? Well, in addition to monitoring when the truck is driving, They'll also monitor things like when the driver brakes hard, how fast he's going at any given moment, if he changes lanes without signaling, what his fuel efficiency is, if he leaves a pre-specified route, right? It'll send all of that information back in real time to the driver's employer, and it'll allow the employer to construct a scorecard which can then be used to rank the driver alongside his coworkers. Sometimes companies will attach a small financial incentive to good performance, or they'll just even simply post the scores up in a common area so drivers can get a sense for where they are as compared to their coworkers. So this technology then seems to form what I call a surveillance convergence. So in other words, the single piece of technology both is surveillance technology for law enforcement, right? It serves a government purpose, but it also serves employers' purposes, right? It allows truckers to be monitored, kind of coming from two different places in a single technology that's all bundled together. And so I think a technology like this tells us something about surveillance more generally in society. So often when we think about surveillance, we tend to think about kind of the big name things, right? Things like the NSA's PRISM program. What we don't think about are these sort of more subtle, insidious technologies that infiltrate all different aspects of our daily lives, how we live, work, and relate to one another. And I think the trucker scenario is really instructive in helping us to think through how those technologies are impacting us, even for really autonomous mobile employees who traditionally have a lot of freedom, like truck drivers. Thanks.